Don't worry if you haven't seen that video. That and this one aren't correlated in any way. Well, to be honest, there are some similarities. But I'm gonna give you the gist of that video and how it has some resemblance with this particular video. While discussing about various horror movies which defined that whole decade, I opted out certain genres out of the equation. I did mention them briefly, but I didn't give them the same time or respect to certain degree because I don't like those particular subgenres in horror. The important one out of them was horror comedy, and the other one, or I should say others, as there were so many of them, but I'm gonna focus on the one that is relevant to this video: zombies in horror movies. It would be a crime to call it a niche subgenre, as it is one of the most popular type of horror movie amongst the general public. It's not like I call those movies pure dog shit or that they are objectively bad in that video, but you can see the change in the tone of my voice when I mention something that I'm not a huge fan of, unlike something that I really enjoy, like psychological horror. So let's take it one at a time. And to start it off, I have to address the biggest elephant in the room. No, not your mom. It's horror movies with comedy elements to them. Comedy and horror, the unlikeliest of mix between two genres in movies. The former one is there to provoke laughter from its audience and generally gives off a warm feeling, while the latter one incites one of the most primal emotions, fear and the dread of something bad happening. So, how can these two extremely diverse genres can be blended together and work in any sensible way? Well, not only does it work, it has been working for a long time, both critically and commercially. Well, most of the time. And even if they aren't that appealing to critics, they still somehow make a good chunk of money because regular people have too much free time. Horror comedy goes way back to the time when horror movies in general were steadily gaining immense popularity. One of the better examples of a horror comedy from that period can be Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, a rare, critically acclaimed horror comedy movie which was a hit in the box office too. And ever since then, horror comedies have solidified their place as a vital subgenre in horror movies. But it wasn't until the early 2000s when those type of movies really started to do well, not financially or critically, but in terms of being actually good entertaining movies, which made sense too. They were full of original ideas and clever premise, which were not simply made for an easy cash grab, as that is my biggest issue with those type of films. Most of the time, they're just mindless movies with nonsensical storyline with glaring plot holes that even a blind person can be aware of them, and usually they're filled with shallow, devoid of any personality, characterless characters who just say stereotypical things which sounds like they copied it from the subreddit r/starter pack. But as I said earlier, they still make a handsome amount of money by just putting some good looking or trending actors. And people love to sit on movies like that. But you can't blame the actors for doing such movies. It is a fabulous way to make an easy buck. Nor can you throw any shade on the directors or producers. They're just playing by the rules of the market, which is set by, guess who? You people. The audience most of the time controls what sort of movies will go mainstream, and a majority of them like those city horror comedies. So quit complaining and start giving those movies a chance which at least uses its resources wisely. Moving on from complaining to focusing on how and why horror comedy movies even work and are possible when the whole concept doesn't make any sense. Well, to understand that, we have to look into the technicality of how horror and comedy work in an astoundingly symbiotic way. To say verbatim to this article, which was inspired by the video which was originally made by Patrick Willems, horror and comedy seem like polar opposites, and for all intents and purposes, they are. One makes you scream out in terror, while the other makes you explode in joyous giggles. One makes you suffer in anxious misery, while the other makes you smile like a delighted idiot. As pointed out by that, there are obvious differences between these two genres of movies, but there are similarities too. The way a scare is constructed is a lot similar to how a laugh or joke is established in a movie. At first, you've got the setup, where the groundwork is laid out, which, if done correctly, makes the payoff in the end more effective. Both of them rely on timing and pacing the whole scene in a way that it produces the end product with maximum potency. The jump scare or the punchline isn't that important or matter as much as how the whole scene is introduced or how it's built up to keep the tension or anticipation alive in the audience. Because if you fail at that, you will not get the desirable results. And that's what comedy or horror movies are. You hear one joke and then wait for the next one, expecting it to be as good as the last one. And if it's not, then it has failed as a comedy movie. You can't show your best trick at the start while doing anything. Just give them enough to hook them in and keep them on their toes until the end and surprise them with something that they weren't expecting. The same goes for horror movies. You witness one jump scare or any scary moment for that matter, and then let the suspense meter go up until the next one comes along. Which is why I have said in the past that the lesser jump scares there are, the better horror movie it is. No matter what media format it is, if you overdo it, eventually it will start to get stale and people would want to see something different, as those jump scares wouldn't incite the same emotion as it did the first time. Which is why some of my favorite horror movies feature more intense jump scare-esque moments rather than just more jump scare type of scenes, as they tend to focus on the psychological aspect, as that will leave a way more impactful mark on the viewer than some measly jump scare. And with that, I can now move on to the next subgenre or character trope to be more precise. In my Master of Modern Horror video, mainly, I didn't give zombie movies a great deal of admiration, a character trope which is recognized worldwide and well appreciated by almost everyone, well, except me. I was never a huge fan of zombies in horror movies or got overly excited by zombie apocalypse, a wet dream by all the nerds who actually think that they can survive those type of situations, because certain video games and movies make it seem way too easy. Even though I don't like it that much, I cannot deny the impact that it had on horror or just movies in general. From classics like the trilogy of zombie movies directed by George Romero to modern classics like Shaun of the Dead by Edgar Wright, I would love to give some credible reasons for why I'm not a huge fan of zombie movies like I did for horror comedies. But if I'm being honest, I don't think I have good enough reasons other than it just not being my cup of tea. I'm pretty sure that I can't reason my way out of this, but I can make more people angry by saying that I don't like monster horror movies in general, which encompasses everything from Dracula or vampires to Godzilla or any otherworldly type creature. Yes, that means I don't like classics like The Thing or Predator. I think it's pretty clear by this point that I don't like horror comedies or monster horror movies, subgenres which has produced some of the greatest movies of all time and some of your favorites too. But the movie that I'm about to mention, which falls under exactly those two subgenres, really caught me off guard with how well written the whole plot was and the interesting character that it boasted, which didn't go for mindless dumb jokes, but moving and emotional storyline, which is full of really interesting and clever ideas. One Cut of the Dead, or the literal translation from the original title, Don't Stop the Camera, is a Japanese zombie comedy which was released in 2017 by Shinichiro Ueda, a really good up-and-coming young director based in Kyoto, Japan. Before this, he had directed numerous other short films which did get good reception from audience and critics alike, and after some other endeavors, he made this movie, which marks his first feature-length film, which was solely directed by him. So, without further ado, let me tell you about the premise with some minor spoilers, nothing serious or too revealing. The scene opens with an intense moment. A woman is about to be game-ended by, from the looks of it, a zombie. In the desperate hope of survival, she calls him by his real name, wishing that he would somehow remember it and come to his senses. He does stall for a brief moment, but goes back to growling and walking extremely slowly, giving the other person ample time to run away. But they are a dumbass, so he takes a bite of her neck. Psych, that's not the truth, as it is not real. They are just filming a scene from their upcoming zombie movie. After that scene, which almost everyone was satisfied with, we are introduced to the director, who, by the looks of it, doesn't seem happy about how the scene panned out, and goes all sicko mode on the actress on how she can't act, and got this far only for her looks. And while having this breakdown of some sort, and leaving the actress on the verge of tears and a potential panic attack, Harumi Higurashi tells all of them to take a break. Even with this brief introduction, you can come to the conclusion that the director is some sort of perfectionist who doesn't like when others don't perform to their professional standard, which then leads to the downfall of the whole project. And he isn't afraid to be a bit harsh while telling them off when things doesn't go his way. Amidst the break, the colleagues of Aika Matsumoto, the lead actress, try to console her, saying that the director is a bit too grumpy today because he has kept everything at stake on this project being a success, and that she shouldn't be that hard on herself. While taking a breather from all that, the three of them, Harumi Higurashi, Aika Matsumoto, and Kazuaki Kamiya, the lead actor, discuss about the director and how some of his decisions can be a bit weird. One can see that as having an artistic vision, or just someone going a bit too far for the sake of being realistic to the character or the surroundings, like deciding to choose that exact place for recording the scene, which according to Harumi has been used to do some shady human experiments in the past and is considered a haunted or cursed sort of place by the locals. And all of this is just spooking the shit out of Aika and Kazuaki, which isn't helped by the well-timed bang on the door, which according to them was just wind. Good old wind being all spooky and scary. Kazuaki tries his best to bring things down to casual by asking Harumi if she has any hobbies, and that just makes the whole atmosphere in the room even more awkward, as if it wasn't already awkward or weird before this moment. Luckily, the camera pans out to Hiroshi Yamanouchi, who the director gave the honorable duty to go and spread blood on the roof of the decrepit and abandoned facility for the sake of making things seem more realistic, I guess. After doing whatever the fuck director wanted Hiroshi to do, he decides to take a small smoke break, but is greeted by Manobu Hosada, another co-worker who is working on the film, who, by the looks of it, is a method actor, as he is still in the groove of acting like a zombie way after the scene was done. Well, it was all fun and game until he really takes a bite out of Hiroshi. Say kids, don't smoke. It really fucking kills. Just like the viewer, or at least me, being surprised by that scene, the three of them were bewildered by what was actually happening. Are they real bloodthirsty zombies or just a prop by the deranged director? Even with what just happened, they were still on the fence about it until they saw Manabu, who was acting really weird and unhuman-like, which somewhat confirmed their suspicion, and in response to that, they all started to act deliriously. Well, except the sound guy, who is just chilling in the background, and the person holding the camera, who is recording everything without reacting even in the slightest. While they were in the middle of figuring out what they just witnessed and playing hot potato with Hiroshi's hand, the director comes back, acting even more unhinged than before, as even in that dire moment, all he cares about is his movie and will go to great lengths for the betterment of getting the perfect clips for it, which heightens the craziness of the scene to an even greater peak. Perhaps all this tension finally cracked the sound guy, as he, for some weird reason, wants to leave that room and go outside, which is infested by zombies. The director tries to stop him, but the sound guy was adamant to leaving the place and storms out of the room and is followed by the director, not because he cares about him, but without the sound guy, his movie will suffer from some audio quality issues. Things take a calmer turn for a minute, until, out of nowhere, Harumi starts to act out of the ordinary, as if something triggered her to act all primal, yearning for survival. Things just get weirder and weirder by the minute with this one. And it doesn't stop there, as the director comes back, but he is not alone. That motherfucker brought a fucking zombie, aka the sound guy, or whatever is left of him, and if you couldn't guess, he did that to film a thrilling scene. After a bit of hustle and tussle, Harumi, equipped with the axe that they were using for filming the fourth scene, chops the head of the zombie, aka the sound guy. But he did get what he wanted, a nerve-wrenching scene where Aika finally showed her real emotions. While the director was having one of his insane episodes, Kazuaki hits him in the back of the head to make him unconscious, so the three of them can make a run for the car outside and finally get away from the zombies and the deranged director. They manage to reach to the van in a haphazardly manner, but soon realize that they don't have the key to start it. The key is with Hiroshi, who pops out of nowhere right at the moment when they needed him. This is what we call movie logic. Just let it slide. Well, he isn't the only person who comes out of nowhere. The director is back too, screaming his iconic line. As you would have already figured out, chaos ensues, and the camera gets knocked down from the hands of the cameraman as we witness Aika trying her best to salvage the key from Hiroshi. The camera gets picked up by someone, most probably by the calm and concealed enigma that is the cameraman in this movie. Following that brief moment of stillness, we get back to the action. Now, for some reason, Aika decided not to go back to the car after she retrieved the key, but head into the opposite direction, which is full of tall grasses and slippery ground. Movie logic, remember? So just go along with it. After a few camera wobbles and some ballsy close-up scenes of the zombie who is slowly chasing Aika, who is running like the typical final girl in a horror movie who is about to die, she decides to go inside a shady-looking underground tunnel, because why the fuck not? Which turns out to be a hilariously dumb decision, as the other way out of the tunnel gets blocked by another zombie, leading her to be stuck in there, only to be saved by Kazuaki, who arrives at the right moment. A very typical movie-like scene. Things take a calmer turn after both of them safely return to the facility, where Harumi is already waiting for them. After a brief stint in which they try to catch a breather, Harumi notices that Aika has a bite mark around her ankle, most probably from one of the zombies that were chasing her. And in a typical zombie movie style, Aika tries to hide that, because that's how wounds work, right? Hide it for a certain duration of time and it goes away. But Harumi isn't having any of that bullshit and insists that she must cut her ankle to save her, or just as a safety measure, so at least one of them can survive this to tell the tale. Kazuaki does his best to stop her as Aika makes a run for her life, but Harumi, with those lessons from the self-defense classes, disarms herself from the hordes of Kazuaki and kicks the ass of every zombie in the vicinity of her. While all of that is happening, the director emerges out of a door screaming his iconic line, but neither can he survive the wrath of Harumi, who almost kicks the camera out of his hand. Aika makes another wonderful decision by making a move to go to the rooftop of the facility from where she couldn't run to any place. But don't worry, things get even mind-numbingly bonkers as Aika, without any external force, falls to the ground in a stereotypical way that people tend to do in a horror movie, as she doesn't try to stand up or run. And this scene is stretched out for way longer than it ever deserved. Kazuaki, again, comes to the rescue to save Aika from the axe-wielding Goliath, that is Harumi, and somehow manages to take the axe away from her, but kills her in that process. With Harumi out of the equation, both of them try to make a run, but Kazuaki gets pulled down by someone or something which is off the screen. Aika, being all alone and scared shitless, goes to hide in one of the abandoned sacks, where she notices that the zombie bite mark in her ankle wasn't real, most probably dried blood or some sort of sticker. It doesn't give her or the viewer adequate time to figure out what is actually going on after knowing about that fake bite mark, as someone or something finds out her location but doesn't seem to notice or acknowledge her existence there. Two really weird scenes back to back. After that interaction, Aika, again, tries to make a run for it to get away from this wicked place for the best. But in the meanwhile, she catches a glimpse of Kazuaki, who is still wandering in the rooftop, and decides to go after him, only to find out that he has turned into a zombie, and we get a recreation of the first scene that we saw in the beginning, only difference being that this one is drawn out to an unfair extent, which leads to some really crazy scenes, like Harumi being resurrected for a brief moment with a fucking axe on her damn head. And of course, the director is back to film this particular riveting scene, as he again praises the actress for her masterclass in acting, making the scene feel even more gripping. Another difference that this scene has from the opening counterpart is that in this one, Aika isn't the one who dies by getting bitten by the zombie, but she kills that zombie, aka Kazuaki, and after that, she goes for the director as she finally gets the revenge for all those moments in which he was getting on her nerves. Even though this is technically a horror movie, we didn't see or have any truly terrifying moment, but all of that changes pretty quickly in here. There is a sudden change in the soundtrack which totally turnarounds the overall atmosphere of the entire film, and that, mixed with the gritty look on Aika's face, is something that can give anyone vivid nightmares. The camera pans out as we finally witness the blood mark that the director asked Hiroshi to do in the beginning of the movie, a pentagram sort of sign drawn from blood, the probable cause of what was actually happening with these film crew. After a while of Aika looking right into your soul, the title of the movie pops up and the credits starts rolling up, signaling the end of the movie as the screen fades to white, the only cut throughout the whole film, justifying its name, One Cut of the Dead or Don't Stop the Camera. But wait a minute, there is a huge chunk of the movie left, and to be precise, only 1/3 of the whole film has been shown until this point. Well, most of you would have already figured it out that it wasn't the end of the movie. I mean, it couldn't possibly be the actual ending, as until this point, there was nothing exceptional about this movie that was worthy of all the praises that I bestowed upon this in the beginning. And if I'm being honest, everything about this film screams a glorified B horror comedy. a particular category of horror movies that can only be enjoyed by turning your brain off while watching it. And this opening half of One Cut of the Dead is reminiscent of all the typical aspects from those type of movies. Weird acting mixed with mindless and questionable decision making that drives the plot, which is set in a storyline that loosely or somewhat makes sense. But in here, it's not like they're acting in a lackluster manner, but there are numerous scenes that is full of over the top and weird acting, and might I add, crazy sometimes, which feels like someone has told a person with no acting background to improvise a scene. As all of you have already witnessed, most of them make a shitload of questionable decisions, which is pretty hard to overlook even considering the standards of a horror comedy movie. The list doesn't stop there, as I haven't mentioned the pacing of the entire film, scenes being drawn out for way longer than they are supposed to be, with no cuts when it was needed to remove all those silent, awkward scenes where the characters would stop interacting with each other out of nowhere, making those particular segments feel out of place, as the camera doesn't cut from that part but lingers there for a long time until something happens or someone else does something. Yes, I know, that would have ruined the whole meaning of the title. But shooting a film with no cuts for the sake of not having any transitions between scenes isn't a smart or well thought of an idea. There are numerous other things like how the zombies act or interact with the characters, as the whole interaction feels scripted to a certain extent. Okay, so you might be wondering, why in the actual fuck I decided to make a video about this, saying that it was one of the best horror comedies, when all I have been doing for the majority of this video is just taking digs at the entire thing. But as I said earlier, this is only the first half out of the total 3, which makes up the whole movie. And in this one, we watched it from the audience perspective, aka the camera which was being used by the cameraman, a concept that it uses in an extremely wise manner that goes along with the whole theme of a group of people shooting a film inside an already fixed film. The first act, in no fucking way, justifies how good the actual movie is, but it being what it is, a weird and awkward mess of 30 minutes, makes the latter stages worthwhile, as each act or half gets better than the last one, making the bigger picture clearer by the moment. And when it's revealed at its finale, you can finally witness how well the pieces fall in the holes left by the messy plotline in this well-fashioned story, which will for sure surprise you. As that is how I judge if a movie is good or not. After watching a shitload of movies, at least in horror, thriller and its subgenres, nothing hardly surprises me with its plot or character arc. Everything, just plain and simple, seems methodical in every aspect, where you can already see most of the plot twists or the surprise mechanics that those genres relies on from a mile away, as they blur the line between foreshadowing and being predictable, which is not something that you want the audience to know of way before it actually happens. The whole concept of jump scares in horror, suspense in a murder mystery, or just jokes in a stand-up comedy will fall apart, as they rely on the notion of catching the viewer off guard. One Cut of the Dead is the exact opposite of this. Usually, I stay very critical while watching any movie nowadays, but this one really got me, as I had some sneaky suspicions, but not in the way that the director had planned for this film. It's amongst one of those rare movies that passed with flying colors in being really creative and full of out-of-the-box thinking that will make Cabin in the Woods look like nothing. You might be wondering, or not, but I'm still gonna tell you this. Why am I talking about it rather than showing it? Well, there are various reasons behind my decision of doing that. First being, as it was the only cut until that point, which ended with revealing a good chunk of the plot that I was able to work with, and it was no brainer to stop talking about the plot beyond that point. Still, I think there are more than enough really well placed clues or scenes to make some sense of what was actually going on in that abandoned facility. But rather than going back to find them, just go and watch it and support the director and films like this which are actually good. I should stop before I really overhype this movie. The other reason behind that decision to leave it where I did and make it shorter than what I had originally planned, was because of copyright issues, as talking about the entirety of the movie could risk for it getting a copyright claim, which already had ruined one of my previous 20-minute video, so it just really made sense to sew until that part. Nonetheless, the film's plotline and how well it's laid out will speak for itself after you watch it, and it doesn't matter if you have or haven't figured out the movie beforehand, as you are in for a wild ride. A magnificent film which dabbles its feet in one of the most saturated and over-the-top genres and subgenres, which is mixed and mastered to a perfection that will give an experience that you would have never imagined, as it subverts every damn expectations in a fabulous way.